why can't agencies again play a key role in implementing AI, just like they did with digital marketing?
He said, "Look, we know the three pieces of cookie to target they're gonna convert, but there's no business in selling you three. We've got to sell you 1,000."
Or people at your workplace, are they like family, or are you a sports team? Where do you stand on that?
Oh my gosh, let's not even go down this road now, because if you have a Fire Stick and your remote is your buy button, as far as I can tell, almost zero precedent of the government breaking up companies and the situation getting better. CTV isn't that you turn it on and you get to 5 to 1 ROI and it's super trackable, because it's a great sales point, right? Isn't that the best sales point? There's this weird thing on AI, and I'm curious how you would answer it, which is, does AI create more jobs or does it eliminate jobs? Why is it that my group account directors get paid the same amount as an entry level surgeon?
Our next guest on the pod is Vic Drabicky, founder and CEO of January Digital, a promising agency that delivers full funnel solutions and has marquee clients like Honest Company, Victoria's Secret, and Steve Madden. In fact, the first time I met Vic was when his agency was sweeping a bunch of awards at an awards night that I'd organized as part of Google. Vic and me have remained friends since then, but what struck me was his story in his own admission, coming from humble background in rural Texas to now being a successful entrepreneur and a multimillionaire. On this podcast, we talk about the future of agencies in an AI first world, talent, culture, CTV, and the inevitable big tech comparisons. Also, big CEO, so he can speak his mind freely about many controversial topics like the antitrust case against Google or Apple's commitment to privacy. We had a blast shooting this pod, and I'm sure you will as well. Welcome to the Lost Party Cookie, the podcast where we discuss the future of digital advertising, big tech, and marketing for those in tech but are not techies. I'm your host, Sandeep Ramesh, ad sales leader, marketer, and investor. All right, here we go. Thank you so much, Vic, for joining us today. I'm so excited to spend the next 1 hour just chatting about many of the stuff that we would have spoken about earlier, but on this podcast. How are you feeling today?
I'm good. I'm in Texas right now, and fall has finally come here. So it just feels so great outside. You can see the leaves are
Is this the best
changing. It's
season in
nice and
Texas?
cool. It's Oh, by far, without a doubt, without a doubt. It only lasts about 10 days, but it's wonderful. So yeah, this is what no income tax gets us: 10 days of good weather.
Well, it gets you a lot of other things, but let's not go there. I want to start by going back to the beginnings, right? Your childhood. And I want to pick your brain on your most core memory from childhood, but any specific memory or anecdote or incident that you think shaped you a lot into who you are today.
I was lucky. I had an awesome childhood. I grew up on a farm in the middle of nowhere. We were relatively poor. I mean, my mom still tells the story of my sister crying because my mom didn't have enough money to buy her a Happy Meal at one point. But it was just such an incredible childhood. And so I think there were things that happened when I was a little kid that I didn't understand. I understood a little bit more like at a later point in life. And then I understood fully only now kind of as an adult. And so I think what I would boil it down to is I would say we grew up relatively poor, but it didn't matter. My parents thought education was the path to changing things. So my parents would negotiate with schools so we didn't have to pay tuition. So one year my mom was the secretary, so we didn't have to pay tuition at the school. One year she was the janitor. She was the janitor for a couple years. One summer my dad re-roofed one of the buildings in exchange for being able to go. And those are things that as a kid you're like, oh, this is cool. School's out. Mom's the janitor. It doesn't matter. I get to play around on the playground. This is amazing. You know what I mean? And then when I went to high school, they sent me to a high school in Dallas called Jesuit. And it was a religious school, but the whole core of it was being a person for others, being a man for others. And they really instill that in you throughout your time there. And that's when you're in high school, you kind of get it, but you kind of don't really. And then you kind of fast forward now and you look back and you go, oh my gosh, like what my mom and dad were doing was so unbelievable. They were giving endlessly of themselves to try to change the generation of my sister, my brother, and I. You begin to appreciate that. And then you tie that together with some of the core principles of the high school, which was you've got to be a person for others at all time. And all of a sudden, those things have shaped so much of kind of how I think, how we run our company for better or worse, but for how we run our company. And I reference those experiences all the
Amazing.
time,
I
all the
wanted
time.
to ask this much later in the interview, but I have to ask this now because it's so relevant. And it's something that actually is a personal question
Yeah.
that I grapple with as well. You're a first generation entrepreneur. You've just told us about your childhood and how you grew up. I know that you love your kids and you really want to be there with them all the time. And this is a question that always keeps playing in my head. Do you feel like they might miss out on some of the hunger that got you here because they have everything on a silver platter? Is that something that bothers you?
You just give me goosebumps. It's something that is a huge point of discussion in our house for that exact reason. Like there is something you learn about hard work and about the value of your time and your intelligence and your efforts when you know that if you don't put your time, intelligence, and effort in as much as you can, there isn't sort of a tomorrow. Like that is such an unbelievably difficult thing to do. And so I've worked very hard in my life and in my career, and my wife has as well, to provide something that is notably better to our kids. So first of all, kudos to my parents because their plan worked, right? It changed the trajectory of what we did. And we wrestle with this a lot. And the best thing that we can think of to do is to make sure we don't just give everything to our kids, right? They've got to be able to work to earn those sorts of things. And two is to expose them to all of it. Don't let them live in this bubble of where our life is. We've got to expose them to absolutely everything. And so every day on the way out to school, we tell our kids three things: work hard, be kind, and have fun. And we try to build the life around those things. Those things that, it's not building a life over the nicest toy or any of those kinds of things. Um, and we hope that it works out. I'll let you know in about 20 years.
I
How's that
kind
sound?
of feel like the secret or the the secret to this is trying to trick your kids, not trick, but essentially trying to trick them into thinking that working hard is the most fun that you can have. I mean, it's somehow if they figure that out, you're set, right? If they can figure that
And my kids are still little, so it's this hard thing where they don't quite understand all of it yet. And so what we're trying to do is we try to find things that they really genuinely enjoy, then ask them to put in extra effort into that thing. And early on, it's taken the role of sports. My daughter absolutely loves soccer, and I'm lucky enough to get to coach her in that. And it's so fun to see her work hard at it, and she loves it. And my son loves t-ball, and to see him just want to get better and want to do those things, like we try to reward that effort where we see it. So there's definitely a good part of me inside that's going, I love that they're working hard at something that they love right now. And as they get older, they'll have to learn how to work hard at things that they don't necessarily love but are requirements for success and
on this topic
having a
is so
happy life
interesting.
too.
The only other thing that I wanted to cover was that a lot of folks, especially entrepreneurs, um, who have probably put in a lot of work at the beginning of their journey and can now probably have more time on their hands. So then the question is, what
Mhm.
is a good example to set your kids? Should they see you work hard because that's what you want them to follow, or do you want to spend time with them and make sure you don't lose out on this golden time that they have? I mean, what's the balance?
Yeah, I wish I knew what the right one is. The only thing I would say is that like life is a series of small adjustments and small balances. Like sure, massive things happen to your life which cause that balance or adjustment to be larger. And so what I've tried to do is my kids see me work hard. They still see me travel, all those sorts of things. And when they travel, they always go, "Oh, why do you need to go to New York, or why do you have to go here, whatever?" And I said, "Well, because you have to work to have a house and to have soccer ball and to have all of those things." And it's taken on this. And then there are other times where if they have a major thing, whatever it is, whether it be a concert at school or just something that's important to them, I make sure that I'm there for that. And as best I can. Without a doubt, I miss them too. But it's turned into this weird thing where my kids, again, still younger, my son especially, who's 5, he'll say, "Hey, Dad, if I wanted to go buy this, how many days do you have to go to New York to make enough money for it?" And so, like, it's a really funny little thing, but it's an interesting thing that he's starting to equate like the work to the value, which I'm kind of okay with right now. Again, he's only 5, so I have plenty of time to screw him up later. But yeah, we try to find that balance as much as we can, and I'm very lucky to have, and I mean this honestly, she's not here. She can't hear me say this. I'm very lucky to have a wife who keeps me in check to make sure my balance is there as well. not only for the kids, but for her
You
and
know,
for
you just,
myself too.
you're, hopefully they don't say, Dad, stay in New York for 10 more days. Don't come back here because I want something else.
Yeah, it hasn't happened yet, so we'll see as
Amazing,
they get
amazing.
older.
This is fun. Let's talk about your career. It's an amazing journey. But I would want to ask you what you thought again from the beginning of your career till now was that turning point when you go back that sort of exploded everything and got you where you are here today.
Yeah, so I mean, I will say I'm not like an entrepreneur by heart. I tend to be a little bit quieter and a little bit more introverted, and those things tend to be opposite of what you would view as an entrepreneur. I'm definitely not a tech guy either. And so I really dumb lucked into. I worked really hard, and in my career, and I happened to work with some unbelievably smart, intelligent leaders that prepared me in a really great way. And when I had an opportunity in New York, I quite honestly was trying to figure out what to do next. I had an old friend who simply said, "Hey, I need some work. Can you do it on the side?" It's like, sure. Income in New York is usually a pretty good thing, and that led to another opportunity, which led to another one, which led to another one, and I was still unsure if I was going to be able to be good at this or any of that. And so it took me almost 2 years to actually begin building our company. I incorporated it probably like 18 months in. At about the 2 year mark, I started saying, okay, maybe there's a path for this. By the third or fourth year, where I was like, okay, cool, now I can kind of figure this out. And I was very lucky to have incredible mentors along the way, just people who steered me in the right direction, people who helped me out with some really hard stuff and gave me some confidence too to keep doing what we're doing. And now, we're a little over 11 years into it, and I'm really proud of it. Are we the biggest in the world? Absolutely not. I think we have some of the best people ever. We have also good human beings doing that work. And so with that, it gives me energy. It's something that gives me energy to wake up to almost every single day. Even on the bad days, it still gives me enough energy to wake up and do it. And I think now, having done all that, I think I've run through enough experiences to where I have something to give back to other people, and I've got confidence that I can actually be a leader for other folks. And so hopefully
And
I did a
and
good job
and
with that.
I'm sure people have asked you this a ton. What is the what is an unconventional piece of advice you'd give youngsters today? Something they may not have heard a lot.
Yeah. I'm pretty religiously say this to people when they ask, you can think of it different ways. It usually comes up with people going, hey, should I work at a brand or should I work at an agency? And especially young people, I say work at an agency every single time. But the core principle behind that is that early on, you think you know what you like, but you actually have no idea. I failed one class in college, and it was a basics of math. And I have to tell you, I mean, I run an agency that has a huge analytics division, and that analytics division works straight to me, and I absolutely love it. I didn't understand it. So what I always tell people is get exposed to the absolute most things you can, both things you like and you don't like, as early as possible. Picking something that's very definitive up front doesn't understand who the future you is. So even if it's something you're unsure of you like or dislike, right away go in and give those things
It's
a try.
amazing. All right. I want to get deeper into our conversation on the business side of things, and that's
Oh,
specifically on
let's
the
do it.
agency business, right? Um, I
Yeah.
want to first. I know the answer to this, but I'm just going to still ask you before going deeper into this. What are the top three challenges facing the agency business today? I have a ton of follow-ups, but let's just start with this.
Oh man, I mean, I can give you the top 50. I think. I think the first one is a theoretical argument that I think has been around for forever, and I think it continues to be the biggest thing that hounds agencies. Agencies at their best are super experienced, creative leaders that can help orchestrate change. Agencies at their normal, all the way down to worst, are outsourced HR. They're just and that line can be really close. If you're outsourced HR, there's a value in that, but that's a completely different value than how agencies tend to sell themselves. And so it's really critical to find the right clients that understand the value that you bring. As an agency owner, you have to really know which side of that you fall on. Are you the commodity that's like, cool, yep, I am outsourced HR and I'm happy to do that, or not? I think that's an existential crisis that agencies face. That said, there are very tactical ones. Labor costs are through the absolute roof. Jared Belsky from Acadia, who I have a ton of respect for, once jokingly said, he said, "Why is it that my group account directors get paid the same amount as an entry-level surgeon?" It's like there's something wrong with that. And so I continue to think that's the best way
Wait,
to
I
talk
don't
about
know
it.
who is going to be unhappy
Number
with this,
two,
the surgeons or the account directors.
totally, exactly right, exactly right. So I'd say labor costs are super hard. If you run an agency, labor costs generally are somewhere between like 50 and 70% of your cost. So labor is the biggest piece of it. The second piece of it is AI and automation are changing what agencies can do. If you look at the last 10 years, there's been a massive run up in performance media, the value it brings. All of a sudden, Google, Meta, and everyone else sort of are automating those things. So if those things become more automated, what's the value that you bring? So I think that's an absolutely enormous one. And then I think the third one is, this is a long shot. I've only thought this through about 5%. But I think the era of people being the product, which is to say you get to use Facebook for free in exchange for your entire life and they get to advertise to you. Google somewhat the same. I think that area is beginning to see some cracks in it. As you see privacy regulation change, all that, that materially changes how advertising works. And so for us, those are the areas that we keep pretty, I mean, there's a ton of other, micro stuff within it, but I think those are the things that we think of as an agency, and we try to figure out how to prepare ourselves for the
As you
future.
know, I've got follow-ups for each one of those things. So let's go one by one.
Yeah,
AI
bring it
and
on.
automation. We've spoken about this when I was at Google for as well, but AI and automation. All right. So here's my hypothesis. Um, your agency and this industry is a product of disruption itself, because there was television advertising, etc., and then it became digital, and it spawned an entire set of businesses like yours, which are doing great. If I were to put the same filter for, let's say, AI and automation, and then the whole world is yet to be converted to AI and automation, why do why can't agencies again play a key role in implementing AI, just like they did with digital marketing?
Yeah, I think they definitely can. There are two challenges to it that I think are unique to maybe some of the disruption we've seen previously. Previously, a lot of the disruption came not from the people who own the media, right? So if you think like Google and Meta will combine to be somewhere around 55 to 60% of all digital spend. And those two, what they've said is, and I don't mean this in a negative way, but what they both said is like, we can build machines that are better than the agencies doing this work. When you think of from TV to like CTV, the option wasn't to replace the person doing the work. It was to give a different option for how to work or where to work, where to spend your dollars. In this case, it's a technology that has the potential to replace that skill set. And so the challenge, there are a bunch of challenges that come with that, but one of them that it now requires is agencies that are making their dollars by sort of turning the knobs in the background. If that goes away, okay, well now what value do you bring? And this is where you go back to that existential crisis of, are you outsourced HR or are you a thought leader? And we are clearly clearly in the thought leadership. That's where we want to be. That's why we have a consultancy. That's why we do all of those things. Our mindset is, great, let those things be automated. Those are things that are repetitive tasks with high labor costs, cost me a bunch of money to do. But guess what? Our deep experience, our breadth of clients, our breadth of challenges that we solved, that is something unique that we can bring to anyone and provide more value. So it's less about how do you make this Google thing work better. It's how much should you spend with Google? How does that actually affect your business? What's the incremental value on that? Should you have a longer measurement of success for marketing? Should it be shorter? Should you spend more? That's stuff that any of the automation that Google, Meta, or anyone builds is still like singular channel focused. And so we believe we have a real value to add to folks by focusing on that side of it. There's this weird thing on AI, and I'm curious how you would answer it, which is, does AI create more jobs or does it eliminate jobs?
Any disruption so far has eventually created more jobs in the long run, but you don't want to tell that to the person who just lost his job to AI. Nobody is going to
I com-
nobody's going
I
to look at it in a
completely
100-year horizon and say, "Oh yeah, in 100 years this is going to create more jobs." But I just got fired, so that's never going to happen.
I completely agree with you, but it becomes this challenge that we all can solve together, which is okay, my choice is to upskill my folks into a different role or have AI eliminate it. Now, that requires entrepreneurs to really have the right mindset. You either think AI is going to help you create a ton of future together, or it's just going to control what you have now. And so for us, we are of the mindset that there is a ton of future to create. Let's upskill our people. Let's use AI to get rid of the mundane tasks that no one loves doing anyways. Let's eliminate that, and let's provide the opportunity to take our people not out so that we can save dollars, but more up so that we can
The
create
one thing
more
that I do
dollars.
have in that I can still say as a trend is that the people always say find the businesses that are still using fax machines, and you'll be able to disrupt them. There are still people using fax machines, people using landlines, and so it's going to be a while before they start using digital marketing, and it's going to be a while before they start using AI. So I feel like there's always the tip of the spear that's adopting these things very quickly, but there's a huge ton of folks who are not going to adopt it that quickly.
Yeah, without a doubt, without a doubt, we are early on, and if you think of like the lifespan of AI as we know it today, we're at like 0.1% developed. You know what I mean? We're at the very
My,
tip of
my,
it.
my family uses a travel agent.
The
So
Well, look, they've got a tool they could use. It's called Expedia. Look, you're exactly right. And so again, you read all the stories of tipping points and all of those sorts of things. So if you think of that big scale, we're like way, way, way down here still. But the thing that I would say is if you go back again, I don't want to sound like a broker. If you go back to like the point of what an agency offers, you either offer that leadership into the next side or you're the outside piece of it. As a agency that's responsible for leadership, it's our job to figure out how and where and at what scale and at what time frame AI can come in and help. And so us, just like everyone else, we're trying to figure it out, and it changes so quickly. There was the Chat GPT announcements last week. Of everything happening there, it changes so quickly that it requires quite a bit of work to stay up on it. I will say we're not in the business of like creating unique new tool. We're more helping folks navigate how to use best and get the most out of them. And so as long as people keep creating, we'll keep having new things to work on, and
yeah,
that sounds mostly
yeah.
fun.
I want to touch upon another point that you already mentioned, which is the labor cost, right? And I'm kind of confused because
Yeah,
we did have this great resignation in the pandemic where you couldn't find anyone to work. But in the tech sector, this year alone, and combined last year and this year, there've been 400,000 layoffs and counting. So why hasn't there been equilibrium in the labor market? Because these are all similar kind of jobs. So you should be able to find people fairly easily now, shouldn't you?
yeah. So what I would say is the amount of people out there are easier to find. The challenge is the amount someone's willing to work for is directly proportional to what they were just making. So whenever we had the Great Resignation, everyone's salaries went up. Then we had inflation, everyone's salaries went up. And so those folks that are out of a job, their first inclination isn't to take a job that pays them less than what they're used to getting paid. And so those labor costs are still high. Now, over time, they will begin to normalize, just as any market will over time. But in the meantime, we've got this spot where there's a lot of candidates out there that are all about 5% too expensive for the work. And the last thing you want to do is hire someone who regretfully goes, "Ugh, I'm taking this job because I need it, not because I want it, not because it's right for me." And so there's some balance in there that just hasn't quite been struck yet. Um, and so we'll see what happens. We have seen there's an interesting thing too with the Great Resignation now is a lot of folks switched jobs and then they went to jobs because they had more money or whatever it might be, and then they figured out they didn't like them. So now we've got this flood of resumes of people who have been at jobs for like 4 months or 6 months or something. You're like, what? Okay, now how do I evaluate you as a candidate? Did you make a bad choice? And that's okay because everyone makes bad choices from time to time. Or are you someone who's just hopping from thing to thing? Like it creates a different HR nightmare on top of, not nightmare, a scenario on top of the labor cost piece that we
That's
also have to
interesting.
consider.
Yeah. And the other thing I know that you're passionate about is culture, and how to scale culture, etc. But I wanted to ask you, as someone who has the vantage point with, let's say, Gen Z, what do you think is like? What are you noticing? How are the expectations different for Gen Z or even later people coming in even later? from their employers versus earlier? And do you buy into
Yeah.
um, this argument that they are a snowflake generation?
um, it's a really good question. So there, without a doubt, there are generational differences, and they play out exactly as you would see them. The challenge as a company is that those are generational differences. You're not going to overcome generational differences, and so it's your job as a company to build a scenario that stays true to your values and the culture that you want, but also isn't so rigid that it completely eliminates big swaths of people because they had a different experience. You've got to find that right balance. And I think during one of the things that was interesting during the Great Resignation is you saw so many people's cultures bend to whatever somebody wanted because you needed the work. Well, all of a sudden, once you do that, you realize that you didn't really stand for anything. You stood for whatever you needed at that time. And I think you saw a lot of companies do that. To some extent, I wouldn't say we ditched our culture or values or that, but you could see there were parts where we were like, looking back, I probably would have done it a little bit differently. And so for us, what we're trying to do is we've tried to build a culture that is very clearly, here's our mission, here are our values, here's what we stand for. And we try to think of those as like bumpers on a bowling alley. There's some flexibility, like as long as we're aimed in this direction, it stays within this spot. Great. If things start getting outside of that, then we need to stop, take another look at the person, at ourselves, at our policies, whatever it might be, to make sure we get back honed in and go. As long as we're all generally going this direction, we trust you to execute that in your way, you to execute in our way.
And then this debate about, is your workplace or people at your workplace, are they like family, or are you a sports team? Where do you stand on that?
Yeah. I grew up in the family side. Like we had our first agency, it was family. When I mean family, divorces, kids, breakups, well, no matter weddings, no matter what it was, like we were a family. And so I think when I started the company, I was guys, we are a family. And I think over time, the intention of that is right, but I don't think that's true. I think sports team is closer, but also a little bit off. There's some in between of those, and so not family because at any point someone can quit or you can force them to quit, right? And so like that immediately breaks that. Now we should care for people in the same genuine way, but we need to understand that social contract is different there. And then from the sports team makes it slightly more cutthroat than it necessarily has to be. Oh, you didn't have the best game today. Sorry, get out. That's not a real way of working either, right? And so it's closer to sports team, but I don't think it goes quite that far. I'm a nerdy sports kid, and as you heard earlier, my kids are too. So I love that sort of competition side of it. But the reality is that like humans are complex and they have feelings and strengths and weaknesses and good days and bad days and all of those sorts of things. And so I just don't think it's quite as hot and cold as
Cool.
sports teams can be.
This is a podcast about digital advertising, so we're going to get technical here. Okay, so I can see that there are some clear business trends or advertising trends emerging. Short form video is one, retail media is one, CTV of course is one. You guys are pretty good at CTV, for example. But are there platforms or products that are doing really well that are going under the radar that you think are like dark horses and things that people haven't noticed?
Oh man, that is a really good question. The overarching trend what we found is that that advertisers who have drank that performance media drug for so long are way too late at diversification. I know that sounds basic, but like if you go way back to even like the Mad Men days, like the key was great creative plus great placement plus some consistency, those sorts of things. And so many folks I think are missing just that basic trick of wait a minute, I actually have to advertise. I actually have to come up with a creative concept. I actually have to go do more than just Google Meta. And so it's very basic, but you can look across the board at D2C brands and performance brands alike and see that they're struggling with that. Within each of that bit of diversification, I think there are sets of tools that can help. And on the creative side, there are, the promise of AI was we're going to create all of the creative for you from scratch. That's still way down the road. But what is here right now is plenty of tools, plenty of basic AI tools that can take your existing assets and just tweak them a bit, add some motion, add some. So like there are all those little ways within each one. So I'm not sure that I can name like a specific like this one tool is like the up and coming one that no one knows about. If you send me $20 after this podcast, I will tell you those things. But what I would say is it's a series of small adjustments, ways of working that are phenomenal. We one that I would say has been a huge strategic advantage for us. We use something called Tracer for our data collection. It's super dynamic. We have something like 100 different sources of data coming in, anywhere from API connections to emails to kind of you name it. And so whenever we can take in all that information so seamlessly, it makes it much easier and quicker for our teams to be able to, develop reporting, analysis, all of those things. So that might be one that I would throw out there just as
Cool.
a
I'm going to double click a little bit on CTV because I know you guys are sort of experts at CTV, and I wanted your point of view on the future of this ecosystem, right? So if you look at the mobile space, there are essentially the folks who make the mobile phones, the Samsungs of the world, etc. Then the OSs like Apple and Google, and then the apps, of course, on top of them. Now it's clear that the operating systems won this battle. They own both that layer and they own even the layer on top of that. But when you look at CTV, there are the OEMs who have a lot of control, far more than the OEMs have in the mobile space. There are some OSs like Firefox, or sorry, Amazon and Google, and then there are a bunch of and Roku, and then there are a bunch of apps on top of that, like Netflix, who are also getting into ads now. So everyone seems to have equal power compared to the mobile ecosystem. So who do you think is going to win this battle going forward?
So the stats on it are kind of interesting. Like if you look at YouTube, it far surpasses most of the competition with subscribership and all those sorts of things. And you would argue Google probably far surpasses anybody else in the marketplace for having advanced tech on it and all those sorts of things. So uh, it's hard to bet against anything that Google does. I would say that Netflix has had a really interesting thing where they began an ad based tier, and then they raised the price of their ad free tier so much that more people chose the ad tier. So this is an interesting business case here because Netflix has unbelievable scale in comparison to everyone else. And now all of a sudden, if they're able to move that scale to an ad-based platform, okay, now this is really interesting. And so to me, it really is a battle between those guys. And that's not to say that anyone else is in bad shape. It's just you've seen a lot of the struggles with HBO and a lot of the other folks who ran out CTV solutions and then they didn't really think of the business behind it and haven't really built that business behind it. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention at this point, we all got rid of cable because it was so expensive. And now we have all these individual things that are as expensive, if not more expensive. If only there was some way to bundle them all together to where we could save some money.
That is
It's
an
kind of like
idea
laughable
that
in
nobody
that
has thought
way.
of
You know what I mean?
before.
It's like what is going on here? So that's a little bit crazy. But I would say between Netflix and Google, those two guys have the power, the money, the technology, and the scale to be able to really drive where
Cool.
this goes.
That's a fair assessment for sure. The other thing I wanted to go deep into is basically the importance of purchase data in a privacy first world, and we're seeing that
Yeah.
that if you want to win in general in the advertising market, you obviously need a consumer engagement platform on the front end, and then you need an ads backend for sure. But you also need some purchase data today to be able to give signals to the advertisers and generally make your performance more effective. We've seen obviously Amazon making the first steps towards building that entire stack. They've got the purchase data and now they're building their upper funnel stack. We've seen TikTok make small steps towards building the lower funnel stack, but there aren't. And then of course there's trade desks, it's collaborations, etc. That you can connect. But if you were to look at the future and say, how is this going to pan out for advertisers, and who should they partner with for the future? Because the advertisers want
Oh man.
quality purchase data, and they want to reach their audiences based on what they're purchasing.
There's always one of my one of my board of advisors was the CEO of a rather large retargeting firm a long time ago, big data firm and all that. And he said to me once, he said, "Look, we know the three. pieces of cookie to target they're gonna convert, but there's no business in selling you 3. We've got to sell you 1,000. And so the same thing applies now when it comes to purchase data, right? There are plenty of folks who probably have amazing, highly qualified purchase data that you can part with, but if it doesn't give you the volume you need, you're going to miss it. And so, unfortunately, what that does is that favors the huge folks with the most data possible, the Amazons of the world. Those guys just have such an advantage. Where the key, though, is Amazon has to not, sticking back with that same statement that my advisor had said, Amazon has to be careful how much they water down that data, how much they sell it, how they use it to people to make sure the value proposition is always there for brands. It just, like, I see what TikTok's doing. Clearly, they've got scale, but they've got a whole other host of issues that they have to work with. Just no one else has quite been able to figure that out. No one else really has an e-commerce business in the same way that Amazon does. And anybody that does is still a microcosm in comparison to the scale that Amazon does. And so, I hate to default and say that for the time being, Amazon is the one, but for right now, like, they're the only one who has the scale and sophistication to be able to use it. And candidly, I don't think they figured out the sophistication yet. They figured out the scale. I think they're still in the process of figuring out the sophistication of how to apply.
Are your advertisers who are big on CTV, are they saying, hey, can we get targeting on CTV where I can say I want people who purchase this, as opposed to earlier the targeting was demographic or etc. Are you getting those requests?
We are, and I will tell you that we fight against that a bit, and that one of the root of what causes them to do that is they're trying to take a channel that is materially built for influence, and they're trying to evaluate it like it's a performance marketing channel. And so you can do that to some extent. However, the amount of people that you target with CTV, with purchase data, who then go on and convert and you can track back to it, is so minuscule. It's still so small. It doesn't mean the impact of CTV isn't there. It's absolutely there. I mean, the CTV is no different in some ways to TV, which has existed for forever, and we still know is unbelievably effective when used correctly. And so, we acknowledge what they're after, but also have to remind folks, like, CTV isn't that you turn it on and you get to 5-to-1 ROI and it's super trackable. Like, let's start with that. If we all agree with that, then we can agree on what the proper
the problem is, you're absolutely right. There is, just because you have a new technology, it's not going to change consumers from saying, hey, I saw this ad, let me go buy it right now. That's not going to happen. Consumer behavior is not going to change because you have a better technology. But you'll be surprised at the number of people selling that. Saying performance TV, etc., etc. So it's like, I mean, that's what advertisers are hearing from the market. Like, hey, you can do TV like you can do search,
because it's a great sales point, right? Isn't that the best sales point? Like, the amount, like, there are several CTV vendors out there that make that exact same argument. And what they then do is they have to layer in a whole bunch of retargeting banners and all these standard tactics, then mush all the results together to make the CTV piece look as though it's that impactful. And it's a pretty smart marketing strategy, and there's truth in what they're doing. However, it also tends to be a little bit more of a closed perspective, because what it doesn't take into account is any outside influence, right? Sure, they saw the TV ad, then they got retargeted and they converted. Well, what about search? What about email? What about all these other things? And so it's the same. It's almost like the same thing it's been in marketing for like 10 years, in digital marketing for like 10 years. It's like everybody's fighting over that attribution. They build systems that make their own system look great, their own solution look great. And the reality is,
and then do you see steps being taken to make the CTV ecosystem more measurable? And is the ecosystem moving towards more standardization, or is it going to be the wild west?
I think we're still early on. I'd love to think that we're moving towards standardization. I think there's like a little hook in there that people are starting to use, which is they're starting to use far more incrementality testing from individual external partners that help qualify those values, because a lot of the normal KPIs that you would get from any campaign are still too narrow to really evaluate the effectiveness. And CTV, I would say, falls in that same category. They either try to make it performance media where the metrics don't look really good, or they try to make it TV where the metrics are so broad that you don't know if it worked or not. And so there's a gap in there of incrementality testing. And earlier, talking about technologies, we quite often work with a company called Measured. They're relatively large now, but they do a phenomenal job on incrementality testing. They do a great job. Them, and there are other incrementality testers out there too. They can help you figure out that middle ground between what is the actual lift when you ran this or not, and that's usually the right set of metrics for something around CTV. So I think the industry will catch up to that without a doubt. In the meantime, you just kind of find little workarounds to figure out the best way to
Cool.
evaluate success.
Moving away from CTV to a topic that I know you will be outspoken about today is regulation. I know I can be outspoken about it because I don't work at
Yeah.
Google anymore, but it's essentially this combination of three or four antitrust cases that are happening, and I want a POV on that. One is, of course, the case against Google that turns out shows up more dirt against Microsoft and Apple than Google itself. And we see this,
Yeah.
we just learned that $20 billion changes hands every year. It's a quarter of Apple's profits, a third of Google's profits. It's a lot of money. So you kind of think, oh, well, it must be really important then to be the default on the Apple browser. So there's that case that's happening. There's also, not many people know this, but people in the industry will know this. There's a case against DoubleClick, which is the same Google, which is this is the accusation of being the judge, jury, executioner of owning the entire stack essentially. And then there is a case against Amazon for anti-competitive practices against sellers, because if you're an Amazon seller, you can't sell cheaper anywhere else, and then you're kicked off the platform. So there are lots of these regulatory battles happening. I just wanted your POV on either each of them or overall in general, if you don't want to go specific to any of them.
I mean, I'm by no means a lawyer, so don't take this and run to the courts with it. But I think what I would say is, anytime you have an individual company that can control pricing, availability, access, sort of all of those things, it's generally a bad situation. That said, there's been as far as I can tell, almost zero precedent of the government breaking up companies and the situation getting better, right? Like, look at telecom for forever ago. Do we all feel really great that we had like two choices in telecom now because they were broken up forever ago? So like it may be like a dotting the I or crossing the T. I'm not sure that it gets better. And so specifically with Google and Apple, okay, so Apple has to get rid of Google. Then what do they do? Like, that's the challenge, is that like everyone's given up on search, and there are very few people that could actually build something that would even give Apple another option. So if you go and you go, Apple and Google, you can't do this anymore, you don't leave Apple with another choice. So in that case, I think Google's probably in a pretty good shape. I mean, they're not going to go to Bing. That's not going to happen. Maybe they build their own. Okay, well, if you government want to break up this Google and Apple thing, who's going to pay for Apple to build their own search engine? And so like it becomes a really interesting, like, by the book, maybe they should be broken up in that way, but I'm not sure. DoubleClick's an interesting one too, because there used to be a ton of different ad servers back in the day, right? There was a competitor to DoubleClick called Blue Streak that got disappeared really quick, and the idea that Google owns all the ad inventory and owns DoubleClick and all of those sorts of things, that's a more clear, at the very least, you have to spin these two businesses off. And you could make the same argument with Amazon and cloud and some of you could force them to split those businesses up, which I think technically would make people feel a bit better. I don't know if it actually solves the end thing we're trying to. Maybe it improves it slightly, but I think that's probably an easier one to see split
The
up.
challenge, especially with Google and even Apple, is that you would have both these truths that people would agree with. People would completely agree that, hey, these folks have enormous power. They have too much power uh, compared to what they should be having. But they would also agree that consumers are better off for their products, and nobody would question the fact that, hey, we might have got better search products if not for Google. I mean, I don't think anyone's making that case, and nobody's making the case that if
Yeah.
Apple wasn't the dominant operating system, we might have gotten better phones than the iPhone. Like, nobody's even making that case. So it's literally like, how do you prove that there's consumer harm if people are kind of happy with what they're
Yeah.
getting?
It would be, I would love to see Apple just, they continue to be disruptive in this space. Their iOS changes have forced the industry to change. They're big enough to force change. I would love Apple at the end of the year to be like, sorry, Google, we actually went with DuckDuckGo, because it's a similar search engine, but it leans into all of the marketing that we tell you about us being privacy first. I mean, it could never happen, but what an amazing stab at the entire industry, right? you talk about taking so much power away from Google. And again, $20 billion is a lot to try to recreate with a company like DuckDuckGo, but like just think of like how disruptive that could be in a way that positions Apple clearly within the we are for privacy, and also puts Google on their heels. Again, I don't think it
I'm
would
not
ever
a
work, but
betting
it'd be
person.
interesting to
I'm willing to
watch.
bet that's never going to happen. But
I think you're probably right, but it
yeah,
would still be
it would be
interesting.
interesting. Amazing. So I think we've covered a lot of ground across both the agency business as well as trends that are happening in the ad tech space, etc. We have our last segment, and it's called crystal gazing. And I'm going to
Yeah.
ask you 10 statements that you just need to say true or false to. And these are statements, these are predictions about the
Okay.
future. And of course, you can elaborate on why you're saying true or false. That'd be interesting as well. But it's always nice to hear from people what they think about the future. Okay, the first one is that the Accentures of the world in the agency business will grow bigger than the Group M's of the world in the next 5 years.
The big consultancies don't understand what service is; they understand what product is. Agencies are service organizations, and so it's a big cultural shift to try to do that.
Got it. Cool. Okay,
I don't have to prove my point to be right. I just have to
I
choose
was
true or
almost going to
false,
debate you
right?
on it. I said, no, this is not a debate. This is just a true or false. Um, okay, this I think we've spoken about this, but I might as well ask you in the true or false sense. AI adoption and transformation will also require agencies.
True,
This is an
undoubtedly
interesting
true.
one. Amazon, which is number three now, will become the number two advertising platform by the turn of the decade, which means they'll overtake Facebook.
Ooh, that's a good one. True, I believe so. The changing landscape and views on social media and the value that it brings to people's lives and all of that, I think is beginning to make a turn. And that opens the door to someone else who's large and has the infrastructure and intelligence
Or you
to move in.
just
And I think
stretch the
that's a win.
lines and they look like they're gonna overtake them in 2020. So um,
Yeah. Yeah.
the metaverse will finally move out of being just a passing fad by 2025.
False. Uh, the concept of the metaverse still applies. I just don't think any of us really quite know what it means yet. It's still an undefined term. And I think that is where Meta probably did everyone a disservice. If instead of trying to coin it and show exactly what it is, instead if they talked about the vision or the promise much more, instead of a poorly drawn avatar of Mark Zuckerberg, we'd be in better shape.
Cool.
So I'm going to say false on that one.
By 2025, it will be possible to add something to cart from your remote on CTV. Is it already possible?
True.
Or is it?
Absolutely. I think you're like right there. There's definitely a scan to buy and things like that. No question. I think that's a hard
So
truth.
your essentially your remote can become kind of the buy button, right? There'll be a buy button on your remote is what we are all thinking is going to happen. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, let's not even go down this road now because if you have a Fire Stick and your remote is your buy button, like that changes how you think of a whole host of media and measurement and a whole bunch of other things too.
Okay, the last two questions outside of the purview of advertising, there is still life in crypto.
Can I do a maybe? I don't. I think there's still probably life in it. I just think it's a different life than what it's been before. There's value in sort of like the decentralization of it, but it's not, astronomical growth as an investment vehicle for folks. I think it is as an alternative has the
Okay.
potential.
And my last question, which is completely out of scope of what we've discussed so far, in 2025, there will be someone at the White House for the first time.
Oh wow, yes. I'm going to be bold on it
That
and
is
say yes.
hopeful.
I think yeah, it is. Like not to say not judging good or bad Republican Democrat, but to say that our two options are an 81-year-old or a 78-year-old, which are Biden and Trump. I just think that doesn't resonate well enough with enough people to where there's a chance at an outsider. And given that Biden has said he's going to run again, that outsider would probably have to come from the Republican side. So we'll see.
I couldn't think of
We'll see.
someone better equipped to answer that question than someone who lives in Austin. Is literally the best of everything that you can think of. But yeah, that's all I had for the true or false. So this has been great. So thank you so much, Vic.
I can't thank you enough. I mean, I was lucky enough to meet you on your Google days, and just I just appreciate you even giving me the opportunity. As we were talking about before, and you seem to always have your finger right on the exact pulse of what's next and what's upcoming. So thank you very much for having me. I appreciate.
Amazing.